The silence stretched across the vineyard terrace as Patricia Morrison held up her phone, showing the family group chat to everyone at the dinner table. Her voice dripped with condescension as she read aloud the message I'd sent earlier declining their invitation to join the family hiking trip the next morning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya says she needs to rest because she's tired from the drive up here, tired from sitting in a car for 2 hours. The laughter that followed was sharp and knowing, the kind that cuts through pretense and reveals exactly what people think of you when they believe you can't defend yourself. Jake, my husband of 3 years, didn't even look up from his wine glass. He just shook his head with that familiar expression of embarrassment mixed with resignation, as if my supposed laziness was a cross he'd learned to bear. "She's been like this since we got married," he said to his sister Jessica, speaking about me as if I weren't sitting right there, always finding excuses to avoid family activities. I keep telling her she needs to be more active, more engaged, but you know how it is. What they didn't know, what none of them had ever bothered to discover, was that while they were planning their morning hike, I would be taking a video call with the CEO of Morrison Development Group. The same Morrison Development Group that belonged to Jake's father, Robert, sitting at the head of this very table. The same company that had been using my workflow management software for the past 18 months, paying my company nearly $200,000 annually in licensing fees. The same Robert Morrison who would be asking my team to expedite a critical system update that could make or break their biggest project of the year. But as I sat there listening to them dissect my character with surgical precision, none of them had any idea that the lazy daughter-in-law they loved to mock had built the technological backbone that kept their precious family business running smoothly. They saw a woman who preferred staying in bed until 10 in the morning and declined invitations to their vigorous outdoor adventures. They never asked why I spent so much time on my laptop, why I received urgent phone calls at odd hours, or why I sometimes disappeared for days on what I called business trips that Jake had long since stopped inquiring about. The story of how I became the black sheep of the Morrison family begins 4 years ago in Seattle, where I'd moved from Austin after selling my first startup to a major tech conglomerate for $37 million. I was 28, financially independent, and ready to start my next venture. What I wasn't ready for was falling in love with someone whose family would spend the next 3 years systematically trying to diminish everything I'd accomplished. I met Jake at a networking event hosted by the Seattle Tech Alliance. He wasn't part of the tech world, which initially intrigued me. Most of the men I'd dated were entrepreneurs or engineers, driven by the same relentless ambition that had shaped my 20s. Jake represented something different, a connection to a world beyond startup culture and venture capital. He worked in business development for his family's real estate company, and there was something refreshing about his grounded perspective on success and achievement. He was tall with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself to anyone. When he told me about Morrison Development Group, he spoke with genuine pride about the company his grandfather had founded in the 1960s. They specialized in sustainable commercial developments across the Pacific Northwest, and Jake's enthusiasm for preserving the region's natural beauty while creating functional business spaces was genuinely appealing. Our early conversations revealed a man who seemed different from his privileged background. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, expressing genuine curiosity about the technology sector even though it was foreign to him. When I explained how my previous company had developed predictive analytics software for supply chain management, he listened intently and asked follow-up questions that suggested he was truly interested in understanding my world. I was careful about revealing too much too quickly. Past experience had taught me that mentioning the sale of my first company often changed how people perceived me. Some became overly interested in my financial status, while others seemed intimidated by early success they hadn't achieved themselves. With Jake, I simply said I'd recently exited a successful startup and was working on my next project. It wasn't entirely truthful, but it wasn't misleading either. What I was working on was Streamline Flow, a comprehensive workflow management platform designed specifically for mid-sized companies struggling with operational efficiency. The idea had come to me during the acquisition process of my first company, when I'd watched two different corporate cultures attempt to merge their completely incompatible systems. I saw an opportunity to create software that could adapt to existing business processes rather than forcing companies to restructure everything around new technology. The development phase was intensive, requiring 18-hour days and the kind of focused concentration that made maintaining relationships challenging. Jake seemed to understand this better than previous boyfriends had. He didn't demand constant attention or get frustrated when I canceled dinner plans because I was debugging a critical system failure. Instead, he would show up at my apartment, with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, and work quietly on his laptop while I coded. Those evenings created an intimacy I hadn't experienced before. We existed comfortably in each other's presence without needing constant conversation or entertainment. Sometimes he would ask about what I was building, and I'd explain the technical challenges I was facing. He rarely understood the details, but his questions helped me think through problems from different angles. Other times, he'd share stories about interesting projects Morrison Development was considering, and I'd offer suggestions about efficiency improvements or technological solutions that might be helpful. 6 months into our relationship, Jake invited me to meet his family at their annual summer gathering in the San Juan Islands. I was nervous about the introduction, knowing that his parents moved in social circles far removed from my world. Morrison Development Group wasn't just a business to them. It was a legacy that connected them to Seattle's establishment families. The Morrisons had been part of the city's social fabric for 3 generations, with the kind of inherited respectability that opened doors and created assumptions about worthiness. The weekend revealed fault lines I should have recognized as warnings. Patricia Morrison greeted me with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes, immediately asking about my little computer business in a tone that suggested she'd already decided it wasn't worth serious consideration. When I mentioned that I was developing enterprise software, she nodded politely, but quickly changed the subject to Jessica's recent promotion at her marketing firm, a topic that generated much more enthusiastic family discussion. Robert Morrison was more direct in his dismissal. During a conversation about economic trends affecting the real estate market, I offered some insights about how automation and remote work might change commercial space requirements. He listened with barely concealed impatience before explaining that real estate was a tangible business that dealt with actual assets, not theoretical digital products that could disappear overnight. The conversation effectively ended my participation in any serious business discussions for the remainder of the weekend. Jake's siblings treated me with polite indifference, tinged with subtle condescension. Jessica worked in marketing for a prominent Seattle advertising agency and seemed to view my technical background as socially awkward rather than professionally impressive. When other guests asked about my work, she would interject with comments like, "Maya's brilliant with computers, but she's still learning about the business side of things." Ryan, who handled client relations for Morrison Development, simply avoided engaging with me altogether unless social politeness demanded it. The weekend established a pattern that would define my relationship with Jake's family for the next 3 years. They weren't openly hostile, but they made it clear that I existed outside their circle of serious consideration. My work was treated as a hobby rather than a career, my opinions dismissed as uninformed, and my presence tolerated rather than welcomed. Jake noticed their coolness, but seemed to interpret it as typical family protectiveness rather than systematic exclusion. What made their attitude particularly frustrating was how wrong they were about everything they assumed about me. While they worried that I might be a gold digger attracted to Jake's family wealth, I was quietly building a company that would soon eclipse their annual revenue. While they questioned whether I understood real business, I was solving operational, Challenges for companies similar to theirs across multiple industries. While they treated me like an outsider who didn't belong in their established social order, I was creating technology that would eventually become essential to their own success. The irony deepened after Jake and I married in a ceremony that his family barely tolerated. Patricia Morrison spent the planning process suggesting more appropriate venues and questioning every decision that reflected my preferences rather than Morrison family traditions. The guest list became a particular source of tension when she realized that most of my invites were colleagues from the tech industry rather than people from established Seattle families. "It's important that a Morrison wedding reflects certain standards," she explained to Jake, as if I wasn't sitting right there listening to her concerns about my inadequate social connections. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Following our honeymoon, Jake and I settled into a routine that accommodated both our professional demands and his family's expectations. We bought a house in Bellevue that satisfied Patricia's standards for appropriate neighborhoods, joined the country club where Robert played golf every Saturday, and attended the charity galas that Jessica organized through her marketing connections. I learned to navigate these social obligations while protecting the time I needed for Streamline Flow's continued development. The challenge was that my most productive hours often conflicted with Morrison family activities. I did my best creative work early in the morning and late at night, when interruptions were minimal and I could maintain the deep focus that complex programming required. This schedule meant declining breakfast meetings, missing evening social events, and sometimes sleeping until late morning after working until 3 or 4 a.m. on critical system updates. To the Morrison family, these habits looked like laziness rather than dedication. They saw someone who couldn't be bothered to wake up for family breakfast, but never witnessed the all-night debugging sessions that preceded those morning sleep-ins. They noticed when I declined hiking invitations, but missed the weekend conferences where I presented Streamline Flow to potential enterprise clients. They criticized my lack of enthusiasm for their recreational activities while remaining completely unaware of the professional achievements that were earning recognition throughout the technology sector. Jake understood my work schedule better than his family did, but even he didn't fully grasp the scope of what I was building. When Streamline Flow launched publicly 18 months after our wedding, I tried to explain the significance of our early client acquisitions and revenue projections. He listened supportively, but seemed more interested in whether the success might allow me to reduce my working hours and become more available for family commitments. The disconnect became particularly apparent when Morrison Development Group began experiencing operational challenges that Streamline Flow was specifically designed to address. Robert Morrison complained frequently about project management inefficiencies, communication breakdowns between departments, and the difficulty of coordinating multiple development projects simultaneously. These were exactly the problems my software solved for similar companies, but suggesting a solution felt impossible given how thoroughly the family had dismissed my professional expertise. Instead, I watched them struggle with issues I could resolve while they continued to view me as someone who contributed nothing valuable to serious business discussions. The frustration was compounded by Jake's inability to see the irony of the situation. When I pointed out that my company was gaining traction with clients facing similar challenges to his father's business, he suggested that perhaps I should focus on more practical applications rather than trying to compete with established business consulting firms. The final layer of irony emerged when Morrison Development Group's IT department, operating independently of any family input, began evaluating workflow management solutions to address their operational problems. They conducted a thorough market analysis, requested demonstrations from multiple vendors, and ultimately selected Streamline Flow as their preferred platform. The decision was based purely on technical merit and cost-effectiveness, with no awareness that the software was developed by their CEO's daughter-in-law. I learned about Morrison Development's selection of Streamline Flow through my sales team, who were excited about landing such a significant local client. The annual licensing fee represented one of our largest contracts to date, and the implementation would serve as an excellent case study for similar companies in the Pacific Northwest market. My team was particularly pleased because Morrison Development had specifically praised Streamline Flow's intuitive interface and comprehensive feature set during their evaluation process. The installation and training process required several months of coordination between my technical team and Morrison Development staff. Throughout this period, I attended family dinners where Robert Morrison discussed the challenges of implementing new software systems and the importance of finding vendors who understood the complexities of their business. He spoke with authority about the evaluation process and his satisfaction with the solution they'd selected, never once mentioning the name of the company or questioning whether anyone at the table might have insights into workflow management technology. Jake would nod sympathetically during these conversations, occasionally asking his father whether the new system was living up to expectations. Robert's responses were consistently positive, praising the software's effectiveness and noting how much more efficiently his teams were operating since the implementation. He particularly appreciated the real-time project tracking capabilities and the automated reporting features that had eliminated hours of manual administrative work each week. Listening to these discussions required tremendous self-control. Every instinct urged me to reveal the connection and claim credit for solving problems that had frustrated Morrison Development for years. But I also recognized that disclosure would fundamentally alter family dynamics in unpredictable ways. The Morrison family had invested 3 years in maintaining their perception of me as professionally irrelevant, and learning that their business success now depended on software I'd created would challenge assumptions they weren't prepared to question. So I remained silent, watching my father-in-law praise my work while continuing to treat me as someone whose opinions about business matters weren't worth soliciting. I listened to Jake express admiration for his father's wise technology choices, while ignoring my suggestions about efficiency improvements for his own projects. I endured Patricia Morrison's comments about my lack of ambition, while my company's revenue grew to exceed Morrison Development's annual profit margins. The cognitive dissonance became increasingly difficult to manage, as Streamline Flow's success attracted attention throughout the technology sector. Industry publications featured articles about our innovative approach to workflow management, and I began receiving speaking invitations from major conferences. The company was mentioned in Forbes as one of the most promising enterprise software startups in the Pacific Northwest, and venture capital firms started reaching out about potential expansion funding. None of this recognition penetrated the Morrison family's awareness because they'd never bothered to learn the name of my company or follow developments in the technology sector generally. When local business journals published profiles of successful Seattle entrepreneurs, they remained focused on real estate industry publications and society magazines. When Streamline Flow received regional awards for innovation and growth, they were attending charity galas and country club events, where such achievements went unnoticed. The isolation was compounded by Jake's increasing pressure for me to modify my professional commitments to better accommodate his family's expectations. He suggested that successful people should be able to delegate more responsibilities and create better work-life balance. When I explained that entrepreneurs couldn't simply step away from critical business decisions, he questioned whether my company was really as important as I claimed, or whether I was using work as an excuse to avoid family engagement. These conversations revealed how little Jake understood about what I'd built or why it mattered to me. He saw Streamline Flow as a project that should eventually reach completion, allowing me to move on to other interests or perhaps focus on starting a family. The concept of building and scaling a technology company as a long-term career commitment seemed foreign to him, despite his own dedication to continuing his family's real estate legacy. The disconnect became particularly painful during Morrison. Family gatherings where my absence from daytime activities would generate commentary about my lack of energy and engagement. Patricia Morrison developed a repertoire of subtle criticisms delivered with concerned sympathy, wondering aloud whether I might benefit from more exercise, better sleep habits, or perhaps professional help for what she delicately referred to as motivational challenges. These comments were always made in front of other family members or guests, creating public moments of humiliation that I was expected to accept graciously. Defending myself would have required explaining work commitments that the family had already dismissed as unimportant, while remaining silent confirmed their narrative about my character flaws. Jake rarely intervened in these situations, having learned that contradicting his mother publicly created family tension that persisted for weeks. The pattern intensified over time as Streamline Flow's success created demands that conflicted more frequently with Morrison family activities. Important client calls couldn't be rescheduled around hiking trips. Investor meetings took priority over charity luncheons, and conference presentations required travel during family vacation periods. Each professional obligation that prevented my participation in family events reinforced their belief that I lacked proper priorities and commitment to our relationships. What they never learned was that their own business had become one of my most important success stories, generating revenue that funded Streamline Flow's expansion into new markets and product lines. Morrison Development Group's enthusiastic testimonials about efficiency improvements and cost savings helped my sales team close deals with similar companies throughout the region. Robert Morrison's praise for our customer service and technical support became a cornerstone of our marketing materials, though his quotes were attributed simply to CEO, Regional Development Company, to protect client confidentiality. The situation reached a breaking point during the planning for Patricia Morrison's 60th birthday celebration in Napa Valley. She wanted an elaborate weekend gathering that would showcase the family's success and social connections to their extensive network of friends and business associates. The event required coordination with high-end caterers, luxury accommodations, and entertainment that reflected Morrison family standards for important celebrations. Jake volunteered to handle the logistics, but his inexperience with complex event planning quickly became apparent. Vendor coordination proved challenging, timing conflicts arose between different activities, and cost management became problematic as expenses exceeded initial budgets. What should have been a straightforward celebration evolved into a source of family stress as Patricia's vision clashed with practical constraints. I offered to help with the organizational challenges, suggesting project management approaches that could streamline vendor communication and prevent scheduling conflicts. Jake initially welcomed my assistance, but his family's response was less enthusiastic. Patricia Morrison made it clear that she preferred traditional event planning methods over technological complications, while Robert questioned whether software solutions were appropriate for personal celebrations rather than business applications. Their resistance to my suggestions reflected the broader pattern of dismissing my professional expertise, but it also revealed something deeper about their need to maintain control over family narratives. Accepting help from someone they'd categorized as professionally irrelevant would have required acknowledging that their assumptions about my capabilities were incorrect. Rather than confronting this contradiction, they chose to struggle with problems I could easily solve while continuing to criticize my supposed lack of contribution to family efforts. The birthday weekend in Napa Valley would become the setting, where 3 years of accumulated tensions finally reached their explosive conclusion. But as we prepared for what Patricia Morrison envisioned as a perfect celebration of family success and social standing, none of them realized that the lazy daughter-in-law they loved to mock was about to demonstrate exactly how much power she'd quietly accumulated while they weren't paying attention. The escalation began subtly, as these things often do, with small comments that accumulated like paper cuts until they formed a wound too deep to ignore. The first incident happened during Jake's birthday dinner at the exclusive canless restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. I had arrived 20 minutes late after a critical video conference with our development team in Austin ran longer than expected. We were troubleshooting a security vulnerability that could affect thousands of users across multiple client companies, including Morrison Development Group, though I couldn't mention that detail to explain my delay. Patricia Morrison looked pointedly at her Cartier watch as I approached their table. "How lovely that you could join us, Maya. We weren't sure if you'd make it." Her voice carried that particular tone of disappointment mixed with resignation, as if my tardiness confirmed something she'd always suspected about my character. Jake stood to pull out my chair, his jaw tight with embarrassment, while the rest of the family exchanged meaningful glances that spoke volumes about conversations they'd already had regarding my reliability. "I'm sorry," I said, settling into my seat and reaching for Jake's hand. There was an urgent situation at work that couldn't wait. The explanation felt hollow, even as I spoke it, because I couldn't elaborate without revealing the scope of my responsibilities or the potential impact of the security breach we'd just resolved. To them, it simply sounded like another excuse from someone who couldn't prioritize properly. Robert Morrison leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass with practiced authority. "You know, Maya, in my experience, truly urgent business situations are quite rare. Most of what people call emergencies are actually poor planning or ineffective delegation." He paused, letting his words settle over the table like a pronouncement from on high. "Successful leaders learn to trust their teams and maintain boundaries between work and personal commitments." The irony was staggering. As he spoke, my team was implementing patches across hundreds of corporate networks to prevent potential data breaches that could have cost companies millions in losses and regulatory penalties. Morrison Development Group's entire project management system was protected by security protocols I'd personally designed, but I sat there listening to lectures about business priorities from someone whose company's digital infrastructure depended entirely on my expertise. Jessica joined the conversation with her characteristic blend of concern and condescension. "Maybe you need to hire more people, Maya. It seems like you're taking on too much responsibility. Most small businesses struggle with proper staffing." "In the beginning." She smiled sympathetically, as if offering sage advice to someone clearly out of their depth. "Jake could probably give you some guidance about building effective teams. The Morrison companies have decades of experience with organizational development." The suggestion that I needed guidance from Jake about team building was particularly galling, considering that Streamline Flow's engineering department now employed 47 people across 3 offices, with a management structure sophisticated enough to handle enterprise clients generating millions in annual revenue. Our HR policies, benefits packages, and professional development programs had been featured in several industry publications as examples of best practices for scaling technology companies. But explaining any of this would have sounded like bragging to a family already convinced that my work was amateur hobby disguised as serious business. Jake squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture meant to be supportive, but that felt more like an apology for his family's behavior. "Maya's company is doing really well," he said, though his tone suggested he was stating something he hoped was true rather than something he understood. "She's been working incredibly hard to grow the business." "Of course she has," Patricia replied with that smile that never touched her eyes. "We all admire Maya's dedication. It's wonderful when people find ways to stay busy and feel productive. I just worry that she might be putting unnecessary pressure on herself to prove something, when she already has everything she needs right here with our family." The word busy hung in the air like an accusation. Not successful, not accomplished, not building something significant. Just busy, the way someone might describe a child playing with toys or an adult pursuing an elaborate but ultimately meaningless hobby. The implication was clear. My work was a phase I'd eventually outgrow once I accepted my proper role within the Morrison family structure. These dinner conversations became a recurring pattern that intensified over the following months. Every family gathering included moments where my professional commitments were dissected and found wanting by people who had never bothered to learn what my company actually did or why it mattered. When I declined weekend trips because of conference presentations, Patricia would wonder aloud whether my speaking engagements were really necessary or just vanity projects designed to make me feel important. When client emergencies required me to step away from family activities, Robert would launch into lectures about work-life balance delivered by someone whose own company operated in crisis mode half the time. The criticism became more pointed. After Streamline Flow received a significant venture capital investment that allowed us to expand into new markets and develop additional product lines. The funding round was led by Kleiner Perkins, one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious firms, and the announcement generated substantial coverage in technology media outlets. For the first time since starting the company, I felt genuinely proud of what we'd accomplished and excited about sharing the news with Jake's family. Their reaction was worse than indifference. It was active skepticism wrapped in polite congratulations. Patricia Morrison's first question was whether I was sure the investors were legitimate, as if successful venture capital firms regularly targeted small Seattle companies for elaborate scams. Robert wanted to know what percentage of the company I'd given up, implying that accepting outside investment demonstrated weakness rather than strategic growth planning. Jessica asked whether the money came with strings attached that might force me to work even longer hours, expressing concern that seemed designed to highlight my existing failure to balance professional and personal priorities. Jake's response was the most disappointing of all. Instead of celebrating a milestone that represented years of hard work and validation from the industry's most respected investors, he focused on what the funding might mean for our relationship. "This is great news," he said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Maybe now you can hire enough people to step back a little. We could finally take that European vacation we've been talking about." The assumption that success should lead to reduced involvement rather than expanded opportunities revealed how fundamentally he misunderstood both my ambitions and the nature of entrepreneurial leadership. Kleiner Perkins hadn't invested $12 million in Streamline Flow so that I could delegate my responsibilities and focus on leisure travel. They'd chosen us because they believed in our potential to become a major player in enterprise software, which required more strategic engagement from me, not less. But explaining this to Jake felt futile, because it would require admitting that my career aspirations extended far beyond what he considered appropriate for a Morrison family wife. The venture capital investment wasn't an exit strategy. It was an acceleration toward building something much larger and more significant than what we'd already achieved. Kleiner Perkins was providing resources and connections that could help Streamline Flow become a billion-dollar company within 5 years. But sharing those ambitions with someone who already considered my current success excessive seemed counterproductive. The family's skepticism about my professional achievements was compounded by their increasing concern about my social obligations within their established community. Seattle's business elite operated through interlocking networks of charity boards, cultural institutions, and exclusive social clubs where relationships were cultivated and maintained through consistent participation in prescribed activities. The Morrison family held prominent positions within these networks, serving on museum boards, organizing fundraising galas, and hosting dinner parties where deals were discussed and alliances formed. My reluctance to engage fully with these social expectations became another source of friction that was interpreted as laziness rather than strategic time management. When Patricia Morrison suggested that I join the board of the Seattle Symphony, I explained that my current workload made it impossible to provide the level of commitment that such positions required. She responded with visible frustration, pointing out that other busy professionals managed to balance demanding careers with community service obligations. What she didn't understand was that other busy professionals weren't building technology, companies from scratch, while competing against established players with vastly superior resources. Streamline Flow required constant innovation to maintain our competitive advantage, which meant I needed to stay deeply involved in product development, client relations, and strategic planning. Adding ceremonial board positions would have meant reducing the focus that had made our success possible in the first place. The social obligations became particularly problematic when they conflicted with critical business opportunities. I missed Patricia Morrison's charity auction to attend a technology conference in San Francisco, where Streamline Flow was nominated for an Innovation Award. The recognition from industry peers represented exactly the kind of validation that could attract new clients and top-tier employees, but explaining this to Jake's family was impossible without sounding like I was making excuses or prioritizing work over relationships. Jake's own frustration with my schedule intensified as his family's criticism became more frequent and pointed. He began suggesting that perhaps I was using work as an excuse to avoid social situations that made me uncomfortable, as if my preference for client meetings over charity luncheons reflected some kind of personality defect rather than professional priorities. When I tried to explain the importance of various business commitments, he would nod politely, but clearly considered my explanations symptoms of an obsessive personality rather than evidence of strategic thinking. The disconnect became especially apparent during conversations about our future plans together. Jake assumed that Streamline Flow's success would eventually allow us to settle into a more traditional lifestyle where I could focus on supporting his career advancement within Morrison Development Group and starting a family that would integrate seamlessly into the Morrison social network. He spoke about these expectations with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether they aligned with my own ambitions or desires. When I suggested that Streamline Flow's growth trajectory might require relocating to Silicon Valley to be closer to major technology companies and venture capital firms, Jake's reaction was swift and decisive. Moving away from Seattle was out of the question, because it would mean abandoning family business responsibilities and social connections that had taken generations to establish. The Morrison family identity was tied to their position within Seattle's establishment community, and geographical relocation would represent a betrayal of everything they'd worked to build. The conversation revealed how differently we conceptualized success and achievement. Jake measured accomplishment through stability, tradition, and community standing, values that emphasized continuity over innovation and preservation over disruption. I was motivated by growth, impact, and the potential to create something entirely new that could change how businesses operated across multiple industries. These weren't just different priorities. They were fundamentally incompatible worldviews that made compromise increasingly difficult. The tension escalated when Morrison Development Group began experiencing operational challenges that Streamline Flow was specifically designed to solve. But I couldn't suggest solutions without revealing the connection. Robert Morrison complained frequently about project coordination problems, communication breakdowns between departments, and inefficient resource allocation across multiple development sites. These were exactly the issues that our workflow management platform addressed for similar companies. But offering assistance would have required explaining expertise that the family had systematically dismissed. Instead, I watched them struggle with problems I could resolve while they continued to view me as someone whose opinions about business matters weren't worth soliciting. The frustration was compounded by Jake's inability to see the irony of the situation. When I pointed out that my company specialized in helping construction and development firms improve operational efficiency, he suggested that perhaps I should focus on more practical applications rather than trying to compete with established business consulting firms. The final insult came when Morrison Development Group's IT department, operating independently of any family input, began evaluating workflow management solutions to address their operational problems. I learned about their vendor selection process through my sales team, who were excited about the opportunity to present Streamline Flow to such a significant local client. The irony was overwhelming. Jake's family was about to discover that the solution to their business challenges had been created by the daughter-in-law they'd spent 3 years dismissing as professionally irrelevant. The installation and training process required several months of coordination between my technical team and Morrison development staff. Throughout this period, I attended family dinners where Robert Morrison discussed the implementation progress and praised the new system's effectiveness. He spoke with authority about workflow optimization and digital transformation, using terminology he'd learned from my engineers without ever questioning whether anyone at the table might have insights into enterprise software development. Listening. These conversations required tremendous self-control. Every instinct urged me to reveal the connection and claim credit for solving problems that had frustrated Morrison development for years. But I also recognized that disclosure would fundamentally alter family dynamics in unpredictable ways. The Morrison family had invested 3 years in maintaining their perception of me as professionally irrelevant, and learning that their success now depended on software I'd created would challenge assumptions they weren't prepared to question. The cognitive dissonance became unbearable during a particularly difficult family dinner, where Patricia Morrison decided to address my motivational issues directly. She'd been drinking wine throughout the evening, which always loosened her tongue and made her criticisms more pointed. As the rest of the family discussed weekend plans for hiking and wine tasting in the Columbia River Gorge, she turned to me with that expression of concerned disappointment that had become her signature. "Look, Maya dear, I've been thinking about our conversation last month regarding your energy levels and engagement with family activities." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to having her opinions received as valuable guidance. "Have you considered that perhaps you're not getting enough physical exercise? I know you spend a lot of time sitting at computers, and that can really affect one's motivation and overall well-being." The suggestion that my reluctance to join their hiking expeditions indicated a health problem rather than scheduling conflicts was insulting enough, but her tone implied that she was offering medical advice to someone clearly suffering from lifestyle-related issues. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but didn't intervene. Having learned that contradicting his mother publicly created family tension that lasted for weeks. "I get plenty of exercise," I replied carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral, despite the anger building in my chest. "I just have different scheduling constraints than most people. My work requires flexibility that doesn't always align with planned activities." Patricia's expression suggested that my explanation confirmed rather than refuted her concerns about my character. "Of course, dear. But successful people learn to create boundaries between work and personal time. Perhaps you need to develop better organizational skills or delegate more responsibilities to other people." The irony was staggering. As she spoke, Streamline Flow was processing millions of data points across hundreds of client companies to optimize their operational efficiency and reduce waste. My organizational skills had created systems sophisticated enough to manage complex, enterprise workflows for some of the largest companies in the Pacific Northwest. But I sat there listening to lectures about time management from someone whose greatest professional achievement was serving on charity boards and hosting dinner parties. Robert Morrison joined the conversation with his characteristic air of business expertise. "Patricia's right, Maya. In my experience, people who constantly claim to be too busy are usually just poor planners. Effective leaders know how to prioritize and delegate." He paused to sip his wine, clearly enjoying the opportunity to share wisdom gained through decades of business success. "Perhaps you should consider whether this little computer project of yours is really sustainable long-term, or whether it might be time to focus on more practical priorities." The dismissive reference to Streamline Flow as a little computer project was particularly galling, considering that our annual revenue now exceeded $2 million and we were processing workflow data for over 300 client companies. But explaining the scope of what I'd built would have required revealing information that could lead to uncomfortable questions about why Morrison Development Group was paying licensing fees to my little project without the family's knowledge. Jake finally spoke up, though his intervention felt more like damage control than genuine support. "Maya's company is doing really well," he said, the same phrase he'd used countless times before when his family's criticism became too pointed to ignore completely. "She's been working hard to build something successful." "I'm sure she has," Jessica interjected with that sympathetic smile that always preceded her most cutting observations. "But sometimes working hard isn't the same as working smart. Maybe Maya needs to think about whether all this effort is really leading anywhere meaningful or whether she's just keeping herself busy to avoid dealing with other aspects of life." The suggestion that my career was elaborate procrastination, designed to avoid meaningful responsibilities like supporting Jake's advancement within Morrison Development Group, revealed how thoroughly they'd misunderstood everything about my motivations and achievements. They saw someone making excuses to avoid family obligations, not someone building technology that was revolutionizing how businesses operated across multiple industries. The conversation continued for another hour, with various family members, offering advice about work-life balance, stress management, and the importance of maintaining perspective about what really mattered in life. Throughout their lectures, none of them showed any curiosity about what my company actually did, or why it might be important to the clients who paid substantial fees for our services. They'd decided 3 years ago that my work wasn't worth understanding, and subsequent evidence of its significance had been systematically ignored or reinterpreted to fit their existing narrative. That night, lying awake next to Jake while he slept peacefully, I made a decision that would change everything. The Morrison family's upcoming celebration in Napa Valley would become the setting where 3 years of accumulated disrespect finally reached its breaking point. But unlike the passive victim they expected me to remain, I would arrive prepared with information that would shatter their carefully constructed illusions about my supposed inadequacies and their own business acumen. The planning for Patricia Morrison's 60th birthday weekend had been Jake's responsibility, but his inexperience with complex event coordination was becoming increasingly apparent as the date approached. Vendor communications were disorganized, scheduling conflicts arose between different activities, and budget management became problematic as expenses exceeded initial estimates. What should have been a straightforward celebration was evolving into a source of family stress that threatened to overshadow the occasion itself. I had offered to help with organizational challenges, suggesting project management approaches that could streamline coordination and prevent problems. Jake initially welcomed my assistance, but his family's response was less enthusiastic. They preferred traditional planning methods over technological solutions, viewing my suggestions as unnecessarily complicated rather than potentially helpful. Their resistance reflected the broader pattern of dismissing my professional expertise, but it also created an opportunity for demonstrating exactly how much they didn't understand about my capabilities. While they struggled with problems I could easily solve, I began preparing documentation that would reveal the true scope of Streamline Flow's success and its impact on companies like Morrison Development Group. The birthday weekend in Napa Valley would become my moment of reckoning with 3 years of accumulated humiliation and dismissal. But as Patricia Morrison envisioned her perfect celebration of family success and social standing, none of them realized that the lazy daughter-in-law they loved to mock was about to demonstrate exactly how much power she'd quietly accumulated, while they weren't paying attention. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning in March when I accidentally opened Jake's laptop while searching for my charger. His email was still logged in, displaying a message thread with the subject line Napa. Planning update that I couldn't help but notice. What I discovered in those messages changed everything I thought I understood about my marriage and my place in the Morrison family hierarchy. The email chain revealed months of careful coordination for Patricia Morrison's birthday celebration. But it wasn't the logistics that made my blood run cold. It was the casual way Jake discussed our relationship with his sister Jessica, treating our marriage like a business problem that required strategic management. Maya's schedule conflicts are becoming more frequent, he had written. I think we need to have a serious conversation about priorities after Mom's party. The family is getting frustrated with her constant work excuses. Jessica's response was even more revealing. Maybe this is actually good timing. If she can't even make an effort for Mom's milestone birthday, it might be the wake-up call she needs about what really matters. Dad thinks she's using work as an excuse to avoid family responsibilities, and honestly, I'm starting to agree with him. How important can her little software company really be? But the most devastating message came from Jake himself, sent just 2 days earlier to someone named Lauren Blake. The name wasn't familiar, but the content made my hands shake as I read. I keep thinking about our conversation last month. You're right that I deserve someone who shares my values and understands what family means. Maya's obsession with her work is affecting everything, and I'm tired of making excuses for her behavior. After Mom's party, I think it's time to have some difficult conversations about our future. I took screenshots of everything before closing the laptop, my mind racing as I processed the implications. Jake wasn't just frustrated with my schedule. Conflicts, he was actively discussing our relationship problems with another woman, someone who apparently encouraged him to question our compatibility. The casual reference to previous conversations suggested this wasn't their first discussion about my supposed shortcomings as a wife. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. For 3 years, I had endured his family's constant criticism while believing that Jake himself supported my career, even if he didn't fully understand it. Learning that he had been sharing their concerns behind my back, discussing our private relationship issues with someone who clearly had her own agenda, shattered the foundation of trust I thought we'd built together. But the screenshots also provided something valuable, evidence that the Morrison family's dismissive treatment wasn't random rudeness, but coordinated strategy. They had been systematically undermining my confidence and position within the family structure, testing my reactions to see how much disrespect I would tolerate before pushing back. Jake's participation in these discussions revealed that he wasn't the supportive husband caught between loyalty to his family and love for his wife. He was an active participant in creating the hostile environment I'd been struggling to navigate. The discovery motivated me to investigate further. If Jake was comfortable sharing intimate details about our marriage with Lauren Blake, what other communications might reveal the true scope of the Morrison family's campaign against me? Over the next several days, I used my technical skills to recover deleted files and email threads from Jake's laptop whenever he left it unattended. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. The Morrison family had been discussing my problems for over a year, analyzing my behavior and developing strategies for addressing what they considered my negative influence on Jake's development as a future family business leader. Patricia Morrison had compiled detailed observations about my social interactions, professional commitments, and attitude toward family obligations. Her notes read like a psychological evaluation written by someone with no training but unlimited confidence in her ability to diagnose character flaws. Maya displays classic signs of social anxiety and perfectionism that manifest as work obsession. One of her assessments read, "She uses professional commitments to avoid situations where she might be evaluated or found wanting." This pattern is typical of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who feel insecure about their place in established social hierarchies. The behavior will likely intensify unless addressed directly. The clinical language disguised what was essentially a hit piece designed to pathologize normal entrepreneurial behavior. Every aspect of my personality and professional dedication was reframed as evidence of psychological problems that required intervention. My preference for early morning work sessions became sleep avoidance indicating anxiety. My decline of hiking invitations became physical fitness issues suggesting depression. My focus during important phone calls became antisocial behavior incompatible with family values. Robert Morrison's contributions to these discussions focused on business concerns, though his understanding of my actual work remained completely inaccurate. He worried that my computer hobby was consuming too much time and energy that should be directed towards supporting Jake's career advancement within Morrison Development Group. In his view, successful marriages required wives to prioritize their husband's professional goals over personal interests, especially when those interests conflicted with family expectations. Jake needs a partner who can help him navigate the social and business relationships essential for leadership within our industry, Robert had written in one particularly revealing message. Maya's antisocial tendencies and obsession with technology work against these requirements. She either needs to develop more appropriate priorities, or Jake needs to consider whether this marriage is advancing or hindering his professional development. The reduction of our marriage to a strategic business decision was shocking enough, but the clinical detachment with which they discussed ending our relationship was genuinely disturbing. They weren't concerned about Jake's happiness or emotional well-being. They were evaluating whether I served their family's long-term interests effectively enough to justify continued investment in our relationship. Jessica's messages revealed the depth of her personal animosity toward me, going far beyond simple disapproval into active malice. She had been documenting what she called my social failures at family gatherings, building a case for why I didn't belong in their established community. Maya consistently demonstrates that she doesn't understand or respect the standards that define our social circle, she wrote to her mother. Her refusal to engage appropriately with charity work, cultural institutions, and family traditions shows a fundamental incompatibility with Morrison family values. Jake deserves someone who enhances rather than undermines his social position. The messages also revealed coordination with Lauren Blake, who apparently had been Jake's girlfriend, in college and remained part of their extended social network. Lauren had recently moved back to Seattle after completing graduate school in California, and the Morrison family clearly viewed her return as an opportunity to address what they considered the Maya problem. Their communications discussed strategies for reintroducing Lauren into Jake's social circle and creating opportunities for them to reconnect without making their intentions obvious to me. Lauren understands what it means to be part of a family like ours, Patricia had written to Jessica. She comes from similar background and shares our values about community responsibility and social obligations. Most importantly, she genuinely enjoys the activities and relationships that Maya finds so burdensome. Jake was much happier and more engaged when he was with someone who appreciated the life we've built here. The carefully orchestrated campaign to undermine my marriage while positioning Lauren as a superior alternative was sophisticated in its subtlety. They weren't directly encouraging Jake to have an affair. They were creating circumstances where comparison between his current wife and his former girlfriend would naturally favor the woman who embraced everything I supposedly rejected. Every criticism of my behavior implicitly highlighted qualities that Lauren possessed and I lacked. But the most damaging discovery was evidence that Jake had been actively participating in these discussions for months, sharing private details about our relationship and expressing doubts about our compatibility that he'd never voiced to me directly. His messages revealed growing frustration with what he called my selfishness and inability to compromise, though the specific examples he cited were all professional commitments that any serious entrepreneur would consider non-negotiable. "I'm tired of always having to make excuses for Maya's behavior," he had written to Lauren after I missed his cousin's wedding to attend a critical investor meeting. She claims her work is important, but honestly, how important can it really be if she's the only person who can handle basic business decisions? It feels like she uses these supposed emergencies to avoid family responsibilities she doesn't want to deal with. The dismissive reference to basic business decisions revealed how fundamentally Jake misunderstood the nature of entrepreneurial leadership. The investor meeting he considered skippable had resulted in a second round of funding that allowed Streamline Flow to expand into new markets and hire additional engineers. Missing that opportunity would have set our growth trajectory back by months and potentially cost us competitive advantages that took years to develop. But explaining this to someone who viewed my career as an elaborate hobby seemed increasingly pointless. The email threads also contained financial information that shocked me more than the personal betrayals. Morrison Development Group was facing serious cash flow problems that threatened their ability to maintain operations at current levels. Several major projects had encountered cost overruns and regulatory delays that were straining their credit lines and forcing them to consider selling assets to cover operating expenses. Robert Morrison's confident discussions about business success were masking a company teetering on the edge of financial crisis. The irony was overwhelming. While the Morrison family criticized my work ethic and business acumen, their own company was struggling with exactly the operational inefficiencies that Streamline Flow was designed to resolve. The workflow management system they'd implemented using my software had improved their project coordination and reduced waste by nearly 30%, generating cost savings that were literally keeping them solvent during this difficult period. But they remained completely unaware that their business survival depended on technology created by the daughter-in-law they considered professionally incompetent. Even more devastating was the discovery that Jake knew about his family's financial problems and had been hiding them from me throughout our marriage. His recent suggestions that I reduce my work commitments and focus on supporting his career weren't motivated by concern for our relationship. They were part of a desperate strategy to position himself as the heir apparent to a family business that might not survive another year without significant operational improvements. The Morrison family's arrogance about their business expertise was built on a foundation of inherited wealth and established relationships that were rapidly eroding. Their resistance to technological solutions and modern business practices had left them vulnerable to more efficient competitors who could deliver projects faster and cheaper using contemporary management methods. Streamline Flow's implementation had provided temporary relief from these competitive pressures, but they needed comprehensive organizational restructuring that would require acknowledging how outdated their existing approaches had become. Reading through months of family communications while knowing they were unconsciously dependent on my expertise for their business survival created a surreal sense of cognitive dissonance. They spent enormous energy analyzing my supposed character, flaws, and professional limitations, while remaining completely oblivious to the fact that their own success increasingly relied on systems I had designed and implemented. The disconnect between their perceptions and reality was so extreme it bordered on delusional. But the discovery also provided something invaluable: complete documentation of their coordinated campaign to undermine my position within the family and potentially end my marriage to Jake. Every dismissive comment, every psychological analysis, every strategic discussion about my supposed inadequacies was preserved in digital format with timestamps and metadata that would be impossible to dispute or explain away. They had created their own evidence trail, while believing their communications were private and secure. I spent the following week methodically organizing this information and cross-referencing it with business data that revealed the true scope of Morrison Development Group's dependence on Streamline Flow's workflow management capabilities. The contrast between their financial vulnerability and their arrogant dismissal of my professional expertise created opportunities for response that went far beyond simple confrontation or emotional outburst. They had given me ammunition for systematic destruction of their carefully constructed narrative about family values and business competence. The planning process required the same strategic thinking I applied to complex business challenges: identifying vulnerabilities, analyzing potential responses, and developing implementation strategies that would maximize impact while minimizing collateral damage. Unlike the impulsive reactions they clearly expected from someone they considered emotionally unstable, my response would be calculated, devastating, and impossible to defend against using their usual tactics of psychological manipulation and social pressure. Patricia Morrison's 60th birthday celebration in Napa Valley represented the perfect opportunity for revealing how thoroughly they had underestimated both my character and my capabilities. The gathering would include not only immediate family members but also business associates and social connections who formed the network through which Morrison family reputation and influence were maintained. Public exposure of their coordinated campaign against me, combined with revelations about their business vulnerabilities and dependence on my expertise, would shatter the facade of competence and integrity they worked so hard to maintain. But revenge alone wasn't sufficient motivation for the systematic response I was planning. The Morrison family's treatment of me reflected broader patterns of discrimination and dismissal that successful women in technology face when they challenge established power structures. Their assumption that professional dedication indicated character flaws rather than ambition, their reduction of complex business leadership to computer hobbies, and their belief that marriage should require abandoning career goals to support male advancement were symptomatic of institutional biases that extended far beyond our personal relationships. Fighting back against their campaign wasn't just about defending my reputation or saving my marriage. It was about refusing to accept a narrative that defined successful women as selfish, antisocial, and incompatible with family values. Every entrepreneur who had ever been told their work wasn't real business. Every woman who had been criticized for prioritizing career development over social obligations. Every person who had been pathologized for refusing to conform to traditional expectations deserved to see these attitudes challenged and exposed. The technical documentation process required several days of careful preparation to ensure that every piece of evidence was properly authenticated and organized for maximum clarity. Financial records showing Morrison Development Group's dependence on streamline flow revenue, email threads revealing their coordinated campaign against me, business performance data demonstrating the impact of my software on their operational efficiency, and correspondence with Lauren Blake discussing their plans for my marriage all needed to be compiled into a comprehensive presentation that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. I also began preparing legal documentation that would protect my interests if the Morrison family attempted retaliation through business litigation or personal attacks on my reputation. The evidence of their systematic campaign to undermine my marriage and professional standing provided grounds for various civil actions, while their dependence on my company's services created leverage that could prevent them from pursuing aggressive legal strategies without risking their own business. Survival. The final element of preparation involves securing Streamline Flow's independence from any potential Morrison family interference. While they had no direct relationship with my company, their influence within Seattle's business community could potentially affect client relationships or vendor partnerships if they chose to wage a public campaign against my character. I needed contingency plans that would protect my employees and investors from any collateral damage that might result from exposing their coordinated campaign against me. As the departure date for Napa Valley approached, I maintained perfect composure. During family interactions, while internally preparing for what would likely be the end of my marriage and my relationship with the Morrison family entirely, Jake continued discussing the celebration plans with obvious excitement, completely unaware that his private communications with Lauren Blake and his family had been discovered and documented. His casual mentions of Lauren's attendance at the EEC birthday weekend felt like additional insults added to an already overwhelming list of betrayals. The night before our flight to California, I packed carefully selected documentation in my carry-on luggage, while Jake showered and prepared for what he clearly expected to be a relaxing family celebration. Hidden among business papers and conference materials were printed copies of every email thread, financial statement, and legal document that would be needed to systematically dismantle 3 years of accumulated lies and manipulation. The Morrison family had spent months planning what they hoped would be my final humiliation as a member of their social circle, but they had no idea that their victim had been preparing a response that would expose everything they had tried. So hard to conceal. The flight to San Francisco gave me several hours of uninterrupted time to review my strategy and confirm that every element of documentation was properly organized for immediate access when needed. Jake spent the journey reading business magazines and occasionally commenting on articles about real estate development trends, seemingly relaxed and confident about the weekend ahead. His casual demeanor while knowing about the family's campaign against me and his ongoing emotional relationship with Lauren Blake felt like a final confirmation that our marriage had been built on foundations that were fundamentally dishonest. As we descended toward the San Francisco airport with the golden California landscape spreading below us, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over my thoughts. For 3 years, I had tried to earn acceptance from people who were determined to reject everything I represented. I had tolerated systematic disrespect, while believing that patience and persistence might eventually change their attitudes toward my work and my place in their family structure. But the evidence hidden in my luggage proved that their hostility wasn't based on misunderstanding or cultural differences. It was a deliberate strategy designed to force me out of Jake's life and replace me with someone who better served their social and business interests. Patricia Morrison's 60th birthday celebration would indeed be memorable, though not for the reasons she was anticipating. The weekend she envisioned as a perfect demonstration of family success and social standing was about to become the setting for revelations that would shatter their carefully constructed narrative about business competence, family values, and moral authority. But unlike the emotional victim they expected to humiliate and dismiss, they would be confronting someone who had spent months preparing systematic documentation of their coordinated campaign against her marriage and her reputation. The luxury resort in Napa Valley represented everything the Morrison family valued about their social position: exclusivity, tradition, and the kind of understated elegance that signaled membership in established elite circles. As our taxi approached the entrance through manicured vineyards and rolling hills, I could see why Patricia had chosen this location for her milestone celebration. It provided the perfect backdrop for demonstrating family success while creating an environment where their social network could gather to appreciate Morrison influence and accomplishment. What they didn't realize was that their choice of such a prominent venue would make the revelations I was planning even more devastating when they inevitably became public knowledge throughout their extended social and business community. The Auberge du Soleil Resort exceeded even Patricia Morrison's exacting standards for luxury and sophistication. Perched high above the Napa Valley floor, the property offered panoramic views of terraced vineyards stretching toward distant mountains, while guest accommodations were designed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape. The Morrison family had reserved an entire section of the resort for their celebration weekend, ensuring privacy for what Patricia envisioned as an intimate gathering of their most important social and business connections. Jake and I were assigned a suite overlooking the valley, complete with a private terrace and infinity pool that reflected the golden afternoon light. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated the romantic setting and the obvious care that had gone into selecting our accommodations. Instead, I unpacked my carefully prepared documentation while Jake showered, arranging everything in my laptop bag for easy access when the moment arrived to reveal what I had discovered about their coordinated campaign against our marriage. The welcome reception that evening provided my first opportunity to observe the full scope of the Morrison family's social network in action. Patricia had invited approximately 40 guests, including business associates from Seattle's real estate community, board members from various cultural institutions, and longtime family friends whose relationships spanned multiple generations. The gathering represented decades of careful relationship cultivation and strategic alliance building, creating a web of mutual obligations and shared interests that extended far beyond simple social friendship. Lauren Blake arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that seemed carefully choreographed to maximize impact on Jake and minimize attention from me. She wore a flowing emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair perfectly, and her confident smile suggested someone completely comfortable navigating elite social environments. When Patricia Morrison introduced her to the assembled guests as Jake's dear friend from college who's recently returned to Seattle, the emphasis on their shared history felt deliberately pointed. Jake's reaction to seeing Lauren again was everything his family could have hoped for and everything I had feared after reading their private communications. His face lit up with genuine pleasure as they embraced, and their subsequent conversation flowed with the easy intimacy of people who had never really stopped caring about each other. They spent much of the evening catching up on mutual friends and shared memories, while I stood nearby feeling increasingly invisible despite being Jake's actual wife. The contrast between Jake's animated interactions with Lauren and his dutiful politeness toward me was stark enough that other guests began to notice. I caught several curious glances directed our way, followed by whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached different groups. The Morrison family's plan to showcase Lauren as a superior alternative to their problematic daughter-in-law was working exactly as they had intended, creating social dynamics that made my inadequacies apparent to everyone present. Patricia Morrison seemed particularly pleased with how the evening was developing, moving smoothly between different conversation clusters while ensuring that Lauren was introduced to all the key players in their social network. Her satisfaction was almost palpable as she watched Jake and Lauren reminisce about college experiences and discuss their respective career developments since graduation. When she approached me near the end of the reception, her smile contained an unmistakable note of triumph. "Maya, dear, I hope you're enjoying meeting everyone tonight," she said with false warmth that didn't disguise her underlying hostility. "I know these social gatherings can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to our crowd, but it's important for family members to make an effort to connect with our friends and business associates." The implication that I was antisocial and incompetent at basic networking was delivered with the kind of subtle cruelty that Patricia had perfected over 3 years of systematic undermining. But instead of the defensive reaction she clearly expected, I responded with calm professionalism that seemed to surprise her. "Actually, I've had several interesting conversations tonight," I replied evenly. "Your friend Robert Chen from the wine distributorship was particularly curious about supply chain optimization technology for agricultural businesses. Apparently, his company has been struggling with inventory management issues that could benefit from automated workflow solutions." Patricia's expression shifted slightly as she processed my response, clearly not expecting me to engage seriously with business discussions or demonstrate actual knowledge about her guests' professional challenges. "Oh, how nice that you found something to talk about," she said, though her tone suggested she considered such technical discussions inappropriate for social occasions. What Patricia didn't realize was that Robert Chen's interest in Streamline Flow's capabilities was entirely genuine, and we had exchanged contact information for follow-up conversations about potential consulting opportunities. Throughout the evening, I had identified 3 other guests whose businesses could benefit from our workflow management solutions, turning what was supposed to be my social humiliation into productive networking for my company's expansion into new market sectors. The dinner arrangements for Patricia's actual birthday celebration the following evening revealed the full extent of their coordinated plan to marginalize me within the family structure. The seating chart placed me at the far end of the main table, separated from Jake by Lauren Blake and his cousin Marcus, while Patricia held court at the head with her most favored guests arranged in descending order of importance. My placement clearly indicated my diminished status within the Morrison hierarchy, while Lauren's prominent positioning next to Jake sent unmistakable signals about their intended future arrangements. But I had spent the day preparing my own arrangements for the evening's revelations. Using the resort's business center, I had printed comprehensive documentation packages for each family member, complete with financial statements showing Morrison Development Group's dependence on Streamline Flow, revenue, email threads revealing their coordinated campaign against me, and business performance data demonstrating how my software had improved their operational efficiency. Each package was individually labeled and organized for maximum clarity and impact. I had also prepared a presentation for the resort's conference room, complete with projection capabilities for displaying the most damaging evidence to the assembled guests. The technical setup allowed me to control the information flow precisely, ensuring that each revelation would build upon previous disclosures for maximum emotional and social impact. Unlike the emotional confrontation they expected from someone they considered psychologically unstable, my response would be methodical, comprehensive, and impossible to dismiss through their usual tactics of gaslighting and manipulation. The birthday dinner began with the kind of elaborate ritual that Patricia Morrison cherished, featuring multiple courses of carefully selected wines paired with locally sourced ingredients, prepared by the resort's renowned culinary team. The conversation flowed smoothly between topics that reinforced the Morrison family's cultural sophistication and business acumen, while I listened quietly and waited for the perfect moment to introduce information that would shatter their carefully constructed narrative about competence and integrity. Robert Morrison delivered a toast celebrating Patricia's contributions to Seattle's cultural community and her role in maintaining family traditions that spanned multiple generations. His speech emphasized themes of legacy, responsibility, and the importance of preserving values that had guided Morrison family success for decades. The assembled guests applauded enthusiastically, clearly moved by his eloquent tribute to his wife's accomplishments and character. Jake followed with his own toast, focusing on personal gratitude for his mother's guidance and support throughout his development, as both a businessman and a family man. He spoke warmly about lessons learned from Patricia's example and expressed appreciation for the social connections and professional opportunities that resulted from her careful cultivation of relationships within Seattle's establishment community. His words contained subtle references to the importance of choosing life partners who shared Morrison family values, comments that seemed directed more toward Lauren than toward me. As the dinner progressed through its various courses, the conversation naturally turned toward business developments affecting their real estate projects and investment strategies. Robert Morrison discussed challenges facing the construction industry, regulatory changes affecting development permits, and market trends that would influence their strategic planning for the upcoming year. His analysis was sophisticated and well-informed, though he remained completely unaware that his company's improved operational efficiency during the past 18 months resulted directly from implementing workflow management systems designed by his supposedly incompetent daughter-in-law. The irony became even more pronounced when Patricia began discussing her volunteer work with the Seattle Technology Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting local startups and encouraging innovation within the regional economy. She spoke passionately about the importance of nurturing entrepreneurial talent and providing resources for promising young companies that could contribute to the area's economic development. Her enthusiasm for supporting technology entrepreneurs would have been inspiring if she hadn't spent 3 years systematically undermining the actual entrepreneur sitting at her dinner table. Lauren Blake contributed to the conversation with observations about technological trends affecting various industries, demonstrating knowledge that clearly impressed the Morrison family and reinforced their belief that she possessed intellectual qualities that I lacked. Her comments were thoughtful and well-articulated, revealing someone who had clearly prepared for these discussions and understood exactly what topics would showcase her suitability as a potential Morrison family member. As the evening progressed, toward Patricia's birthday cake presentation, I excused myself from the table under the pretense of making an important business call. Several guests nodded sympathetically, clearly viewing my departure as another example of the work obsession that made me unsuitable for serious social occasions. Patricia's expression suggested satisfaction that I was removing myself rather than disrupting her celebration with inappropriate professional distractions. Instead of making phone calls, I spent 15 minutes in the resort's conference room, ensuring that all technical equipment was functioning properly and that my presentation materials were organized for maximum impact. The documentation packages I had prepared were arranged on a side table, ready for distribution at the appropriate moment. Everything was positioned to create the most devastating revelation possible while maintaining complete factual accuracy. That would be impossible for the Morrison family to dispute or explain away. When I returned to the dining room, the birthday cake ceremony was concluding with enthusiastic applause and photography that would undoubtedly be featured in Seattle. Social publications. Patricia looked radiant as she accepted congratulations from her guests, clearly pleased with how perfectly the evening was unfolding according to her carefully planned specifications. The timing was ideal for introducing information that would transform her moment of triumph into something far more memorable and much less pleasant. "Before we conclude this wonderful celebration," I announced, rising from my seat with calm confidence that immediately drew everyone's attention, "I have a special presentation that I think will interest everyone here, particularly those involved in Seattle's business community." The sudden shift in conversation created a moment of uncertain silence as guests tried to interpret my intentions, and Patricia's expression moved from surprise to concern. Jake looked confused but not yet alarmed, while Lauren maintained her composure despite clearly sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold. As many of you know, the Morrison family has been very generous in sharing their opinions about my work and professional capabilities over the past 3 years. I continued, maintaining perfect eye contact with Patricia while addressing the assembled guests. Tonight, I'd like to return the favor by sharing some information about their business operations that I think you'll find quite illuminating. Robert Morrison started to speak, but I continued before he could interrupt. I've prepared a brief presentation in the conference room that includes financial documentation, email correspondence, and business performance data that reveals some fascinating insights about Morrison Development Group's recent success and their relationship with the technology sector they claim to understand so well. The sudden tension around the table was palpable as the implications of my announcement began to register. Patricia's face had gone pale, while Jake looked increasingly alarmed as he processed what was happening. Lauren seemed frozen in place, clearly recognizing that the carefully orchestrated weekend was taking an unexpected turn that could affect her own strategic interests. I think it would be educational for everyone to learn about the innovative workflow management solutions that have improved Morrison Development's operational efficiency by 30% over the past 18 months, I said, enjoying the yow-yow, growing panic in Robert Morrison's eyes as he began to understand what information I might be about to reveal. I'm particularly excited to discuss the annual licensing fees they pay to Streamline Flow Technologies for enterprise software solutions. The mention of specific company names and financial figures created immediate recognition among several guests who were familiar with both Morrison Development Group's recent improved performance and Streamline Flow's growing reputation in the Seattle technology sector. Robert Chen, the wine distributor I had spoken with the previous evening, looked particularly intrigued as he began to connect implications that the Morrison family had worked so hard to conceal. In fact, I continued, standing and moving toward the conference room while maintaining perfect composure, I think everyone would be fascinated to learn about the emails discussing my supposed professional incompetence that were exchanged between family members who had no idea that their business survival depends entirely on software systems I designed and implemented. Patricia Morrison finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a strangled whisper than her usual commanding tone. Maya, I think you've had too much wine this evening. Perhaps you should return to your room and rest before you say something you'll regret. Actually, Patricia, I've never been more clear-headed in my life, I replied with a smile that felt genuinely warm for the first time in 3 years. And I have a feeling that after tonight, you're going to understand exactly why I've been too busy with my little computer hobby to participate in all those family hiking trips you thought were so important. The transition to the conference room felt like a victory march as guests filed in with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension. Patricia Morrison tried to suggest that everyone might prefer to continue their conversations on the terrace, but the combination of social politeness and genuine intrigue made it impossible for her to prevent what was about to unfold. The Morrison family had spent the entire weekend positioning themselves as successful business leaders and moral authorities, but they were about to discover that their victim had been preparing a response that would systematically destroy every assumption they had made about power, competence, and family loyalty. As I connected my laptop to the projection system and watched the Morrison family take their seats with growing dread, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with finally telling the truth about what I had accomplished while they weren't paying attention. For 3 years, they had treated me like an unsuccessful intruder who didn't belong in their sophisticated world. But they were about to learn that their sophisticated world had been quietly revolutionized by the woman they had worked so hard to dismiss and marginalize. The first slide displayed Streamline Flow's logo alongside our current client list, which included over 300 companies across multiple industries. The second slide showed our annual revenue figures and growth projections, numbers that exceeded Morrison Development Group's total business volume by a substantial margin. But the third slide was the one that made Robert Morrison's face turn completely white. A detailed breakdown of licensing fees paid by Morrison Development Group to Streamline Flow Technologies over the past 18 months, totaling nearly $300,000 in payments to the daughter-in-law they considered professionally incompetent. The silence in the conference room was absolute as the implications registered with everyone present. Lauren Blake looked stunned, clearly realizing that her carefully planned re-entry into Jake's life had been based on completely inaccurate assumptions about my professional status and financial independence. Jake himself appeared to be in shock, staring at the financial figures while his brain struggled to process how thoroughly he had misunderstood both my career success and his family's business dependence on my expertise. But it was Patricia Morrison's expression that provided the most satisfaction, the complete collapse of her confident superiority, as she confronted irrefutable evidence that everything she believed about family dynamics, business competence, and social hierarchies had been systematically wrong for 3 years. The woman she had spent countless hours analyzing and dismissing as psychologically disturbed and professionally irrelevant had built the technological infrastructure that kept her family's business operational and profitable. "Now," I said, advancing to the next slide, which displayed email excerpts from their coordinated campaign against my marriage, "let's discuss some of the fascinating insights your family has shared about psychology, business management, and the appropriate role of wives in supporting their husbands' professional development." The silence that followed my revelation about the Morrison family's email communications stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Patricia Morrison's face had progressed from pale to ashen as she stared at the projected excerpts of her own words analyzing my supposed psychological defects and professional inadequacies. The clinical language she had used to pathologize my behavior looked particularly damning when displayed in large font for 40 witnesses to read and absorb. "Maya, this is completely inappropriate," Robert Morrison finally managed to say, though his voice lacked its usual authoritative confidence. "These are private family communications taken completely out of context. I think everyone would prefer to return to celebrating Patricia's birthday rather than enduring this vindictive display." I advanced to the next slide, which showed the timeline of their coordinated campaign against my marriage alongside Streamline Flow's revenue growth and client acquisition milestones. The visual correlation was devastating. As my company achieved greater success and recognition within the technology sector, the Morrison family's criticism of my character and professional competence had intensified proportionally. Their systematic undermining wasn't random family dysfunction. It was a calculated response to my achievements that threatened their narrative about social hierarchies and appropriate feminine behavior. "You're absolutely right that context matters, Robert," I replied calmly, maintaining eye contact while clicking to a slide displaying his own email assessments of my business capabilities. "So let's provide some context about these professional evaluations you've been sharing with Lauren Blake and other family friends." Lauren Blake shifted uncomfortably in her seat as her name was mentioned, clearly recognizing that her involvement in their strategic planning was about to become public knowledge. Several guests turned to look at her with new interest, processing the implications of her presence at the birthday celebration and her obvious coordination with the Morrison family's relationship engineering efforts. The next series of slides detailed Morrison Development Group's financial challenges over the past 2 years, including cost overruns on major projects, regulatory delays that had strained their credit lines, and competitive pressures from more efficient development firms. The data painted a picture of a company struggling to maintain profitability in an industry that was rapidly evolving beyond their traditional business model. "What makes this particularly interesting?" I continued, advancing to a slide showing specific performance metrics, "is how dramatically Morrison Development's operational efficiency improved after implementing Streamline Flow's workflow management systems. Project completion times decreased by 28%, communication errors dropped by 45%, and overall cost management improved enough to generate the profit margins that allowed you to afford this weekend's celebration. Jake had been staring at the financial projections with growing comprehension, finally understanding the scope of what I had built, while his family dismissed my work as an elaborate hobby. "Maya, I had no idea your company was this successful," he said quietly, though whether he was apologizing or simply stating facts remained unclear. "Of course you didn't," I replied, clicking to a slide displaying excerpts from his own communications with Lauren about my supposed selfishness and inability to prioritize our relationship properly. "You were too busy discussing my character? Flaws with your college girlfriend to ask any meaningful questions about what I was actually accomplishing professionally." The email excerpts showed Jake describing my work commitments as excuses to avoid family responsibilities, questioning whether my company was really important enough to justify missing social events, and expressing frustration with what he called my obsessive personality and inability to maintain proper perspective about priorities. Reading his words projected for everyone to see created a profound sense of liberation, as if 3 years of accumulated hurt and frustration were finally being acknowledged and validated. This weekend was supposed to be my final humiliation. "As a Morrison family member," I continued, addressing the entire room while keeping my voice steady and professional. "The seating arrangements, Lauren's prominent placement next to my husband, the carefully orchestrated conversations about my social inadequacies, everything was designed to demonstrate how much better Jake's life could be with someone who appreciated the Morrison family values that I supposedly rejected." Patricia Morrison finally found her voice, though it came out sharp with defensive anger. "How dare you violate our privacy and twist our legitimate concerns about your behavior into some kind of conspiracy? We've tried to be patient with your antisocial tendencies and work obsession, but this vindictive attack proves everything we've said about your character." I clicked to the next slide, which displayed Streamline Flow's client testimonials and industry recognition, including awards from the Seattle Technology Alliance and features in major business publications. "Actually, Patricia, this isn't an attack on your character. It's a demonstration of mine. For 3 years, you've subjected me to systematic psychological evaluation and social marginalization while remaining completely ignorant about the professional achievements that earned recognition throughout the technology sector." The testimonials included quotes from CEOs praising Streamline Flow's innovative approach to workflow optimization, venture capital partners discussing our potential for industry transformation, and business analysts projecting our expansion into new markets. Several guests in the conference room recognized company names and began whispering among themselves as they processed the scope of my professional success. "But the most important context," I said, advancing to a slide showing Morrison Development Group's dependence on my software systems, "is understanding that your family's recent business success, the improved efficiency that allowed you to complete projects on time and within budget, resulted directly from implementing technology developed by the woman you've spent 3 years calling lazy, antisocial, and professionally incompetent." Robert Morrison's face had moved beyond pale into a gray pallor that suggested genuine physical distress. "That's impossible," he said weakly. "Our IT department selected that software after extensive evaluation. They chose the most qualified vendor based on technical merit and cost-effectiveness." "They absolutely did," I confirmed, clicking to a slide displaying the evaluation criteria and scoring matrix that Morrison Development's IT team had used to assess different workflow management solutions. Streamline Flow received the highest ratings in every category: functionality, user interface design, customer support, scalability, and total cost of ownership. Your technical team made an excellent decision based purely on business merit. The irony was devastating when presented visually. The same family that had questioned my professional competence had unknowingly selected my company as their preferred technology partner through a competitive evaluation process that confirmed everything they refused to acknowledge about my capabilities and achievements. "The truly fascinating part," I continued, is reading your discussions about business strategy and operational improvement, while knowing that your recent success implementing those improvements depended entirely on systems designed by someone you considered intellectually and professionally inferior. I clicked through several slides showing specific workflow optimizations that had improved Morrison Development's project coordination, reduced administrative overhead, and eliminated communication bottlenecks that had plagued their operations for years. Each improvement was tied directly to streamline flow features that I had personally designed to address exactly the challenges Robert Morrison complained about in family dinners. Lauren Blake had been silent throughout the presentation, but she finally spoke up with a voice that betrayed her growing discomfort with how thoroughly her strategic position had been undermined. I think everyone understands that business relationships and personal relationships are separate matters. Maya's professional success doesn't excuse her inability to prioritize family commitments or maintain appropriate social connections. The comment provided a perfect opportunity to address the broader implications of the Morrison family's campaign against my character. Actually, Lauren, that's exactly the point I want everyone to understand. The systematic criticism of my social behavior, work schedule, and family priorities wasn't based on legitimate concerns about relationship balance. It was a coordinated effort to undermine my confidence and force me out of Jake's life so that he could reconnect with someone his family considered more suitable. I advanced to slides displaying the coordination between Lauren and various Morrison family members, including discussions about reintroducing her into Jake's social circle and creating opportunities for them to reconnect. The strategic planning was sophisticated and deliberate, designed to appear natural while systematically positioning her as a superior alternative to their problematic daughter-in-law. The psychological assessments, the constant criticism of my social engagement, the dismissal of my professional achievements, none of it was random family dysfunction. It was calculated manipulation designed to convince Jake that our marriage was incompatible with his long-term happiness and family obligations. Several guests looked genuinely shocked as they processed the implications of such systematic relationship engineering. The Morrison family's reputation for integrity and moral authority was crumbling in real time as evidence mounted that their treatment of me represented deliberate cruelty rather than legitimate family concerns. Jake had been staring at the coordination timeline with increasing horror, finally understanding how thoroughly he had been manipulated by his own family. "Mom, is this true? Have you been planning to break up my marriage for 3 years?" Patricia. Morrison's response revealed the depth of her conviction that their campaign had been justified and necessary. "We've been trying to help you see that Maya isn't the right partner for someone with your background and responsibilities. Everything we've done has been motivated by love and concern for your future happiness. By systematically destroying my wife's confidence and reputation?" Jake asked, his voice rising with anger that seemed genuine for the first time all weekend. "By coordinating with Lauren to undermine my marriage while lying to me about your intentions?" The family dynamics were shifting rapidly as Jake began to understand the scope of their manipulation and his own unwitting participation in their campaign against me. But his anger felt too little and too late, especially given his own contributions to their systematic undermining of our relationship. "Actually, Jake," I said, clicking to slides displaying his own communications with Lauren about our marriage problems, "you weren't an unwitting victim of their manipulation. You were an active participant who shared intimate details about our relationship with another woman while discussing whether our marriage was worth preserving." The excerpts from Jake's emails were particularly damaging because they revealed his genuine frustration with my professional commitments and his growing attraction to Lauren's apparent understanding of Morrison family values. His messages weren't just complaints about scheduling conflicts. They were expressions of fundamental incompatibility with my career ambitions and personal priorities. "You've been emotionally involved with Lauren for months while maintaining the pretense of working on our marriage," I continued, watching Jake's face crumble as he confronted the evidence of his own betrayal. The family discussions about my inadequacies provided convenient justification for feelings you were already developing independently. The revelation that Jake had been actively participating in undermining our marriage while maintaining emotional connections with another woman created a moment of absolute silence in the conference room. Even Patricia Morrison seemed stunned by the comprehensiveness of the evidence I had compiled about their coordinated campaign. Robert Chen, the wine distributor who had expressed interest in Streamline Flow's capabilities, was the first guest to speak up. "Maya, I have to say that your company's achievements are genuinely impressive, and the efficiency improvements you've generated for Morrison Development suggest exactly the kind of innovative thinking that could benefit many businesses in our region." His comment broke the tension and opened the floodgates for other guests to express their reactions to what they had witnessed. Several business leaders in the room began discussing Streamline Flow's potential applications for their own companies, while others questioned how the Morrison family could have been so wrong about my professional capabilities and character. The shift in social dynamics was immediate and devastating for the Morrison family's carefully constructed reputation. Instead of the successful business leaders and moral authorities they had positioned themselves as, they were being revealed as manipulative and dishonest people who had systematically abused someone whose achievements exceeded their own. "I think the most important lesson here," I said, advancing to my final slide, which displayed Streamline Flow's future expansion plans and projected growth, is understanding the difference between inherited privilege and earned achievement. The Morrison family has spent 3 years criticizing my work ethic, business competence, and social contributions while benefiting directly from innovations they were too arrogant to recognize or appreciate. The final slide showed revenue projections that would make Streamline Flow one of the Pacific Northwest's most successful enterprise software companies within 2 years, with international expansion plans that could potentially revolutionize workflow management across multiple industries. The scope of what I was building made Morrison Development Group's achievements look modest by comparison. "I want to thank everyone for attending Patricia's birthday celebration," I concluded, shutting down the presentation and beginning to pack my materials. "It's been educational for all of us to learn about family values, business competence, and the importance of recognizing achievement, regardless of where it comes from or who accomplishes it." The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Several guests approached me immediately to exchange contact information and discuss potential business relationships, while others made pointed comments to the Morrison family about the need for better judgment regarding professional capabilities and character assessment. Lauren Blake left the conference room quickly without speaking to anyone, clearly recognizing that her strategic position had been completely undermined by revelations about the coordinated campaign. Jake followed me back to our suite, his face a mixture of shame and desperate confusion. "Maya, I know how this looks, but you have to understand that I never intended for things to develop this way. The emails with Lauren were just conversations between old friends, and my family's concerns about our relationship seemed legitimate at the time." I continued packing my belongings while he spoke, feeling surprisingly calm despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Jake, the evidence speaks for itself. You participated in a systematic campaign to undermine our marriage while developing emotional connections with another woman. Your family's concerns weren't legitimate. They were strategic manipulation, designed to achieve predetermined outcomes." "But I love you," he said, though his voice lacked conviction even as he spoke the words. Everything I said in those emails was just frustration about our different priorities. I never wanted our marriage to end. I turned to face him directly, feeling genuinely sorry for someone who had been manipulated by his own family, but remained unable to accept responsibility for his choices. "Jake, you love the idea of me, someone who would enhance your social position without challenging your assumptions about priorities and success. But you've never loved the actual person I am or the work that defines who I've become." The conversation continued for another hour, but the fundamental incompatibilities that had always existed between us were now impossible to ignore or rationalize away. Jake wanted a wife who would support his advancement within established social hierarchies, while I needed a partner who could appreciate innovation and disruption of those same hierarchies. The Morrison family's campaign had simply accelerated the revelation of differences that would have eventually destroyed our marriage anyway. I left Napa Valley the next morning while the Morrison family was still dealing with the social fallout from the previous evening's revelations. Several guests had extended business invitations that could expand streamline flow into new market sectors, while others had expressed interest in investing in our upcoming expansion rounds. What was supposed to be my final humiliation as a Morrison family member had become a networking opportunity that could accelerate our company's growth by months. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward, partly because Jake's family wanted to minimize publicity about their systematic campaign against me, and partly because my financial independence made property division relatively simple. I kept everything related to streamline flow while Jake retained his position within Morrison Development Group, though their business relationship would never be the same after learning about their dependence on my expertise. 6 months later, Streamline Flow completed our Series B funding round with Kleiner Perkins, leading a $28 million investment that valued our company at over $100 million. The funding announcement generated substantial coverage in technology publications and established us as one of the Pacific Northwest's most promising enterprise software companies. Several articles mentioned my background as a Seattle entrepreneur who had overcome initial skepticism to build innovative solutions for complex business challenges. Patricia Morrison's friends occasionally asked about my post-divorce activities, but she had little information to share beyond vague references to my continued involvement with technology work. The Morrison family had learned the cost of systematic dismissal and manipulation, but they seemed incapable of acknowledging the full scope of their misjudgment or the opportunities they had lost through their arrogance and prejudice. Lauren Blake and Jake announced their engagement 8 months after our divorce was finalized, with Patricia Morrison expressing delight about finally welcoming someone into the family who understood Morrison values and priorities. Their wedding was featured in Seattle social publications as a celebration of 2 prominent families joining their legacies, though observers noted that Morrison Development Group's business performance had declined since implementing new management systems to replace their previous workflow solutions. I attended a few social events where I encountered various Morrison family members, but our interactions were limited to polite pleasantries that carefully avoided any reference to the birthday weekend revelations or their subsequent consequences. They seemed genuinely unable to process what had occurred or acknowledge their role in creating the circumstances that led to such systematic exposure of their character and judgment. The most satisfying outcome was building Streamline Flow into exactly the kind of company I had envisioned when I first started developing workflow management solutions. Our team now includes over 120 employees across 4 offices, with client relationships spanning multiple industries and international markets. The recognition we've received for innovation and workplace culture has validated everything I believed about building technology companies that prioritize both technical excellence and social responsibility. Sometimes former colleagues or business associates ask about my experience with the Morrison family, curious about how such successful people could have been so wrong about my professional capabilities and potential. I usually explain that inherited privilege can create blind spots that prevent recognition of achievement when it doesn't conform to expected patterns or social categories. The Morrison family's expertise in real estate development didn't translate into understanding technology entrepreneurship, but their confidence in their own judgment prevented them from acknowledging what they didn't know. The broader lesson extends far beyond personal vindication or family dysfunction. Successful women in technology regularly face systematic dismissal of their achievements and questioning of their priorities when professional success conflicts with traditional expectations about feminine behavior and family obligations. The Morrison family's campaign against me reflected institutional biases that affect countless entrepreneurs who challenge established power structures or social hierarchies. Fighting back against their manipulation wasn't just about defending my reputation or exposing their hypocrisy, it was about refusing to accept narratives that define ambitious women as selfish, antisocial, or incompatible with family values. Every entrepreneur who has been told their work isn't real business. Every woman who has been criticized for prioritizing career development over social obligations. Every person who has been pathologized for refusing to conform to traditional expectations deserves to see these attitudes challenged and exposed. The technology sector has provided opportunities for demonstrating that success can be measured through innovation, impact, and value creation, rather than social conformity or inherited status. Building streamlined flow into a significant company, while maintaining integrity and treating employees with respect, has been more satisfying than any acceptance I might have gained by conforming to Morrison family expectations about appropriate feminine behavior. The missing chair at Patricia Morrison's birthday dinner was supposed to symbolize my exclusion from their definition of family and success. Instead, it became the catalyst for revealing how much I had accomplished while they weren't paying attention, and how little their approval mattered compared to the respect I had earned from people who understood what I was building and why it mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.